because there's already water in those pipes. So that's how it's related. So it's a storm, it's a groundwater, surface, rainwater system that's attached to the Chesapeake Bay, which is attached to the Atlantic Ocean. So it's a combined type of system. So, so this is a graph, and I know this is kind of looking at what's happening kind of at a level that is for Hampton Boulevard, because my colleague Dr. Larry Atkinson made this for a place that floods very frequently on Hampton Boulevard in Norfolk. But this is what you can see. This is an observation, and yes, it's always flooded. In fact, the biggest hurricane that hit this region was 1933. Okay, so that's this hurricane here, and we got a lot of flooding that year, but look at what you see with this observation of flooding. There's a marked increase, and yes, it's always flooded, but now it floods a lot more frequently, and this is an observation. This is not a computer model. This is measured at the Sewell's Point tide gauge. So this is the measurement from the Sewell's Point tide gauge that's on the Navy base in Norfolk, but it's measuring the height of the water, and it's one of the largest records on the East Coast. So it goes all the way back to 1928, so you can see the trends here, and so we're rising at what seems like a very small number, 4.6 millimeters per year, but if you add that up year after year after year, it means we've had so far 1.5 feet of sea level rise, and we're looking at that accelerating now. So that's, you may have seen those articles in the newspaper that show that the observations now show that this sea level rise is actually speeding up. So not only do we have the fastest rate on the East Coast, so these are all the different tide gauges all along the East Coast and the Gulf, and you'll see there are a couple places here, these red ones. Red is the highest level, so there's a couple places in Texas and Louisiana that have a higher rate of sea level rise than us, but we have the highest. That's us right there. That little, see that bright color right there? That's us, and we've got the highest rate. So we always say the region has the highest rate of sea level rise on the East Coast. And so what does that mean? Well, there's a couple things. That's relative sea level rise, and the reason it's different around the region is because we have subsidence here. That's land sinking, and probably many of you have heard about land sinking here. Now, land sinks for a couple of different reasons. In this region, the reason we're seeing the most land sinking is because of historical groundwater pumping in the region. This is actually a study that was actually tracks through the 1970s. We don't have modern studies. They have just put new equipment in place to start measuring the ground sinking again in the area. They're also using satellites to measure it. But this is an old study, so we think that this is the primary reason this region happens to be sinking faster is because of these historic groundwater withdrawals around these paper mills here in the region. So the other reason that we're sort of a hot spot for sea level rise has to do with the proximity to the Gulf Stream. We're pretty close. We are right, I know this is a very small map, but we are right there, if I can keep my hand steady here. And we're really close to where the Gulf Stream, which is this warm water that comes up around and goes out here, mixes with this colder current that's coming down in here. So since we're right in there, what that means, and if you read this article in the Virginian Pilot about the Gulf Stream, one of my colleagues does this research at ODU, and basically they did this diagram showing if you could, the ocean is not flat, it kind of looks flat when you're looking out from the beach, and kind of water looks flat, but in fact, at the Gulf Stream, it kind of rises up 3 feet, a little bit higher out in the ocean. And when the Gulf Stream slows down, it goes down and the water on our side goes up a little bit. And so, for instance, during Hurricane Matthew, the Gulf Stream slowed down quite a bit. And that was measured in Florida. And when we see that measurement in Florida of the Gulf Stream slowing down, we know here the water is higher than it normally is. And they call this the anomaly. It's hard to exactly explain what it is, but it's the Gulf Stream that's causing that difference. So we get higher levels of water out in the Chesapeake Bay. There's a higher level of water there than you would expect from wind or from the astronomical tide, from the regular tides that you get. So that's why we saw during Hurricane Matthew, not only did we get lots and lots of rain, but it couldn't drain out because that water was really high as well, okay? So that's kind of working together. So this is kind of brings this graph, again, here's our local tide gauge, that says Sewell Point's tide gauge, this time it's in green, but just to kind of recap, it's an addition of global sea level rise, which is going up, okay, that's all sea level rise. It's uneven around the globe, it rises faster in some places than others, but that's the global, that's about half of our sea level rise, and then the subsidence is the second half of our sea level rise that we've experienced. And then when we have a storm, and we have high tides, and we have the currents here, there's the current piece, that takes us up to those extremes that we get. And so, is this going to change? Is this going to turn around? Is this going to get better? Unfortunately, the news there is no. So this again is the Sewell Point tide gauge. If we put projections, this is the extreme projection. This is the more moderate projection for where we would go in the future to 2050. What used to be in the 1970s, yes, it flooded, but relatively less, about 20 hours of flooding per year in the 70s on average. Today we're seeing 10 full days of flooding per year per average, and this is on Hampton Boulevard, but not necessarily in your neighborhood. But that same place will see 60 full days, 6 times as much in 2050 if we take the extreme projection. So the answer is we don't know exactly what this will be. It could be anywhere in here, you know, in 2050, but it's not going to necessarily be less. And that's sort of the take home that I have for you. The other part of this is my last slide, I promise, and then you can ask some questions about the science if you want. And this was actually done by one of your great City of Virginia Beach staff people, looked at the rain gauge data from the Norfolk Airport. And he saw that not only do we have the sea level rise, we're also getting more extreme rainfall. And this is brought out across the country. You've heard about big storms in Baton Rouge. They had in South Carolina, they had a big storm where they had very, very extreme rain. We are experiencing that as well in the region. So what used to be a 20-year storm is now a 10-year storm. And what used to be a 100-year storm as far as rainfall is now more like a 50-year storm or a 25-year storm. So that's something that we're also experiencing as well right now. So you can't necessarily use the past to predict what's going to be in the future with weather and water. Does anybody have any questions? It's going back to Virginia. Any questions about the science? Yeah.
Yes, this didn't affect where we're at with our problem with the flood. Because if it did, everybody on the east side of Virginia Beach Boulevard and the highway would have been flooded also, and they weren't flooded like we were.
Well, let's just pause right there, okay? Because we're going to get into some information to kind of show you how what Dr. Covey's talking about with sea level rise actually did affect us. We're going to get into it. Don't shake your head. No, hang with me, okay? Just hang with me here. I know. Look, I agree. You know what I found out along my road along South Plaza Trail? The drains were clogged. That had a lot to do with it. and then outfalls down the Presidential Canal were damaged. That had a lot to do with it.
But
this has something to do with
for
it.
20 years, darling.
What, I'm sorry?
It's clogged for 20 years. The city ain't doing nothing about it.
Exactly, but this does have a part to play in it. And as we move forward, as the city moves forward and does something about it, because our voice is getting louder and louder about it, as our voice gets louder, this factors into what they have to do. And so that's what we want to do here. We want to educate you on that. We want you to know about it. Okay, so let's just hang on. Just hang on. Let us get through it. Okay. I know you guys have a lot of questions.
Right, and this is the science that they're using to figure out how to move forward. So that's one of the points that I wanted to kind of leave you with. This is the kinds of things that they're having to look at and take into consideration. I think she had her hand up for longest.
Even though we have, that's okay, I can speak loud. Even though we have, attempted a remediation by building those, when you have to build now, you have to have these big ponds that they call drainage ponds, but they're not effective against all the overbuilding we've had. We've had so much cement put in our city and in Norfolk, it's not just us, but more runoff area that we can't keep up with it. And I think that some of that is that we're building cement villages and we have nothing I call it the sponge. We need our sponges to be there for
That's
us.
why I say, hang on, because we're going to get into this, okay? Let us get forward. Guys, we only have this room for a little bit, so if your question is about the science, keep your hand up, okay? Come on down, because that's...
talk really loud though. Okay, you were talking about the pumping that caused
The groundwater pump.
the groundwater pumping. Now that's a totally different concept than the pumping stations that we have in Virginia Beach. Can you- Now, is that something that's a long-term pumping? It's not,
That was a long-term pumping, and that's actually being addressed, and there actually are some projects now in place to try to remediate that subsidence. We can't completely go back to where we were, but we can't, in fact, the HRSD has a plan for doing some pumping back into the aquifer. So there is some work that we can do, and also controlling how much is pumped out.
Come on up. The podium is on, so if you want to stand at the podium, the mic is on the podium.
We're going to get into it a little bit later, but part of the problem, as I see it, was that in the Windsor Woods area, and that we have all our water flows when it does go out, goes through a canal and some culverts. Those culverts are not very wide, and so it's a bottleneck holding back the water. The other issue was we got a lot of rainfall within a short period of time. That's not, we didn't historically have that kind of rainfall in our area. And also with the canals not being dredged for years, with the stoppage occurring and never been cleaned out, so it got worse and worse and worse. So you will find that that part of it is that it's not running out fast enough. The pictures you saw that they showed you, and the other ones that I took and everything, were the next day. The water had already gone down. Okay, so it was like 28 inches, over 2 feet, on my garage door and around on the side of my house. And I, just like everyone else, was sitting there putting stuff down at the front door, thinking the water was going to come in the front door, turned around, and in the middle of the night, and saw things floating behind me. And it was a shock. So there's many reasons I think that people have, and they're a combination, not just a single one reason. Okay, that's why the water didn't go down fast enough. Now, contrast this with what Dr. Covey will say is about rain bombs. They're calling them rain bombs now. Houston had almost 70 inches of rain. We had a max of about 13. So if we got more rain from another hurricane, it would be a lot worse because it won't run off fast enough. And we have built more places, so that means the ground that actually absorbs water, a lot of water, and it doesn't anymore because, of course, we had two storms prior to that, and the ground was already saturated, so it couldn't run off either. So it can't run off because of the narrow bottleneck, which we will get into, the bottleneck. and other reasons as well. So, like you, I'm grasping at every little straw that I can about why I think that it was like that. My friends, when Sandy went by, he was on the Winhaven, and he had a gauge where he put how high the water got. When Matthew went by, it wasn't that high. So it was a foot or more below that. And I was thinking, well, wait, you're saying that the water was so high it couldn't run off. But that's miles away from where my part is, and also because of the culverts only being so wide. There's only 3 of them that are together. So there's many reasons, not just one. Rainfall intensive, the rain that happened before, it didn't soak in, and that's why I believe it's a multiple thing here. Okay, and so we have more stuff in.
We gotta move on, guys. We only have this room until 4:30, so I really want to move on. We got a lot of information to tell you guys, okay? So that's Bob. That's Bob. All right. So and all of this is going to come together. I promise. It's all going to come together. Just give us some time to get through it. Trust me, okay? It's going to come together, and I want you to see how it comes together, okay? Trust me, come on. My house flooded. My house flooded. And there are a lot of reasons why my house flooded. We're going to get into it, okay? So I want to tell you about the waters of Windsor Woods and Princess Anne Plaza, because you need to know where you live. You need to know what's around you. So let's identify some of them, shall we? We have over here, Lake Trashmore. And just for reference, this is Rosemont Road. Here is South Plaza Trail. Here is Holland Road. So we have Lake Trashmore. And we have Lake Windsor. We have Thalia Creek. We have the Presidential Canal, which sometimes is called Thalia Creek, sometimes it's called the Windsor Woods Canal. We're going to refer to it all throughout this presentation as the Presidential Canal. And then we have West Neck Creek over here. It starts up here, it comes all the way down, West Neck Creek goes from Chesapeake Bay down to Back Bay. Okay? So keep that in mind where these waters are along Windsor Woods and Princess Anne Plaza. It's important for you to know that. Now, we're going to get into some problems. Okay? Tidal flooding. What is it? What is tidal flooding? You think you know what tidal flooding is? Let's listen to a little short video about it.
Extreme high tides happen a few times per year. Sun, moon, and earth align. These high tides are sometimes called neap tides or spring tides. These are the highest annual tides.
Okay, well I can't get the volume up any higher over here, and I think the door is locked back there. So, yeah. So, just gotta listen in real good for me, please. It's not coming out of the speaker because it's connected through HDMI, so it's not gonna come out of the speaker. Sorry. Well, you won't be able to see it. I could. Give me 1 second.
I think all it's showing is that when you've got the moon and the sun and the moon that are lined up with your, and you have high tides, those are called spring tides. You guys have heard the king tides. Okay, that's the highest astronomical tide of the year. It's just when things are in the fall. That happens in the fall. So look for the highest tides in October and November and maybe some in September. That's when you're going to have your highest tides of the year. Yeah, exactly. They all line up through exactly. Right when they are as well. So it's not.
All right, give me one minute here so I can get some, because we do have some audio for you to listen to. If I get this thing to switch over on here for you. The VGA, it's not going to go on VGA. So we just have to hang with you. You just have to listen